I'm currently 18 years old, and I've recently come back to reality after about a period of darkness. I was a junior in high school when I started to meet some of the wrong people. I was making tons of friends outside of school who weren't in school, so I was beginning to be influenced by all these people. My grades began to drop dramatically, and I was very withdrawn from my family. I came from a big family, a family where no one does drugs, and I really do feel blessed to have such an amazing family. So the fact that I was beginning to go to the wrong path was a horrible thing. Both of my parents are the firstborn children of their families, and I'm the firstborn into the family on both sides of my family, out of 18 cousins. So I am in a position where I have an influence over a ton of my cousins. I am a Native American on my dad's side, and my great-grandfather was the healer of the family. He was a chairman for natives. When I was a child, we had a ceremony where he said that when he dies, I'm going to be the healer of the family. He passed away when I was about 5, so I've been raised being told I would be very clairvoyant. I didn't ever really understand it growing up. Another thing I feel like everyone should know about me is growing up, I had extremely bad night terrors where I would experience the presence of extremely malevolent entities. So I have always known what evil is like, because I've been a target my whole life, as everyone is. My great-grandfather explained how I can't use drugs or be on any type of medication. For some reason, this was emphasized. Growing up, I was the center of attention, and I was always that sacred child. I was raised by many different family members because my parents were 18 when they had me. So I was pretty much raised in the middle of the family, rather than just my parents. I just wanted to tell you all of this because I feel like this adds a lot of weight to the situation. As I said before, I met a lot of the wrong people. I was just too curious. I couldn't resist myself. I began to use ecstasy, marijuana, and drink frequently. I also began to do tons of designer drugs that nobody really knows what they are. Also, I believe drugs basically make you extremely vulnerable to spirits and can invite things into your life that you don't want there. Note that I was only 16 years old. I began to hang out with people who were in their 20s. I was going to parties a lot. I was skipping school and lying to my family. I would lie for money, and all I wanted to do was have fun. This whole time, I was basically numb. I had no clue what was going on. I was so vulnerable. I was always uneasy, though as I remember one specific event that changed me. I was with my friend when I snuck out of my house. We walked to his house and began to do some drugs. We then had to leave the house for some reason. I think to meet up with another friend or something. Not quite sure. We were walking and met up with whoever we needed to see. There was 5 of us and 2 people who were sober, and I was not that high. It was ecstasy. As we were walking back, we were all perfectly fine, laughing and talking and having a good time, being rowdy teenagers walking down the street at about 3 a.m. But the next thing, we all began to hear some blood-curdling screams and cries a few blocks in front of us. The best way to explain what it sounded like: a woman being raped. You could even say it sounded like a woman giving birth. But there was also something very weird about it because it sounded like a woman crying out for help. Then it was changing to a baby screaming, then a cat screaming. They were all very alarming sounds and almost somewhat confusing. It was the most horrific thing I have heard in my entire lifetime. We all went silent and stopped and stood in horror, looking at each other to see if everyone else had heard it. We all heard it. At the moment, we all thought it was a woman and her child who were hurt by someone and then left on the sidewalk, hurt and crying. That's the scenario that went through our minds. So there were two of us who wanted to go towards her to help, and the rest wanted to run the other way. I demanded we go help the person who needed help. So we all walked toward the sound. The sound was then getting extremely loud. We felt very close to her, but we couldn't see her. Her screams began to get very intense, as if she was being tortured, and the sounds were extremely disturbing and gross. This is when it began to scare us, when we felt like the noise was on top of us, but we couldn't find her. Then it just abruptly stopped. Just like that. It quit when we felt like we were right next to it. When it stopped, we were all swept with a feeling of extreme evil. I remember feeling almost every negative motion, while feeling extremely filthy and disgusting, like I wanted to throw up. I remember looking at my friends' faces, and they all had a look of horror on their faces as well. We all just looked at each other, as if we were all mentally saying, "Do you feel that too?" And then we all began to just run. We all knew it wasn't what we thought it was. This event pretty much killed the night, and I was traumatized. For the next couple of days, I was with my friends, and we experienced a lot of strange little happenings, many of which we were all experienced by other people also, who just happened to be there with us. Like strange noises, footsteps, and stuff like that. The weird thing is, I told my friend about the noise, and she doesn't do drugs or anything. She is a normal person, and she's an extremely smart person. She's my girlfriend now. I told her that I hoped this didn't mean that someone in my family was going to die. About a month later, my grandmother died. It was pretty horrible. Everything just seemed to crash and burn in my life right then. The thing is, all of this bad stuff happening in my life didn't slow me down one bit. I continued to carry out my bad habits. Then came the summertime, and the entire summer consisted of partying. I wouldn't come home on the weekends, and it was causing my parents extreme distress. Sometimes they would drive around looking for me. So summer flew by, and before I knew it, I was a senior. I barely graduated high school. I slowed down a lot on partying and drugs. I stopped drugs in January of 2012, but I began using hallucinogens, which was the worst choice I think I have ever made. I believe hallucinogens allow us to see more than what we want to see in reality. I believe hallucinogens allow us to see more than we want to see in reality. It's like eating the apple of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. I wasn't using hallucinogens very often, but maybe once a month. July of 2012, I'd calmed down quite a bit and wasn't partying or using any drugs at all. But I suddenly wanted to go to this thing called a barter fair. I live in Washington, and our area is famous for these barter fairs. People come from across the country to go to some of them. They're basically like Woodstock. You come and trade art, food, drugs, and anything else you have for something someone else has. It is a huge hippie festival. I've always heard about them and thought it would be awesome to go to. I found out there was a small one not too far from where I lived. So I talked to some of my friends, and they let me ride with them there. I was so excited because I thought it would be awesome, as I love hippie culture. Boy, was I wrong. We got there, and it was nighttime. There were probably about 150 people there, but maybe more. I was very excited, but nervous because I didn't know what to expect. We began to walk around, and I immediately felt uncomfortable. The kind of people that were here were not good people. We were deep in the woods away from any city, and it was filled with hillbillies. And I'm sorry for using this word, but that is the best I can describe them as. These people were beyond anything that I have seen before. They almost didn't seem human. They were fiends for drugs, and that's all they wanted. They were brainless. Some of them weren't even coherent, and they'd be so high they would basically fall asleep while standing. They reminded me of zombies, and there were tons of them. People like them, I look at them as in complete submission to Satan. They were empty vessels at which anything could come and go in their soul. I was beginning to get very scared. There was a huge bonfire with many people huddled around it playing drums, gazing into the fire. It was almost like they were worshipping the fire to me. There were even fire dancers and people lying on the ground in random places. It was extremely filthy and there was junk everywhere. There were car skeletons all around and tents too. There were, it seemed, hundreds of tents. You could tell that people lived there. As we were walking around, there were all these stands selling various drugs of any kind. They had huge bags full of all these different colored powders. Pretty much any drugs you wanted was right there. These were the busiest parts of the place. People buying drugs like crazy. It scared me because of how dirty it felt just to be in this environment. At one point, I even noticed a pregnant woman with her bare stomach hanging out, holding alcohol and obviously high on drugs. I just wanted to stand by the big fire and not walk around. As I walked up to the fire, I could hear a few people talking about how they had never seen me before and why I was even there. They didn't even know me, and they knew I could hear them. They wanted me to hear. I just ignored them and stood there minding my own business. I felt extremely out of place for some reason, as if everyone could tell I was different and didn't belong there. A guy came up to me, and you could tell he hadn't groomed himself in a long time. He had a full beard and long hair. It was dirty and gross looking. He was covered in dirt, and his clothes were basically rags. His eyes were half open as he came up to me asking me how I was. He started talking to me, and it was all complete nonsense, as if his main motivation was to confuse me. I could tell he was doing this on purpose, and he wouldn't go away. I felt very unsafe in front of him. He offered me some opium, but I said no. After a bit, I stopped answering him and he turned around and yelled, "I can't find my friends here," to all of the people standing behind me. All the people began to shun me like I did something bad. Everyone glared at me, which was the last straw for me. I didn't want to stand there and feel humiliated. Then another guy came up to me who appeared to have a deformed arm and the side of his face was messed up. He was shaking extremely bad and started acting very happy to me. He began to tell me he took a handful of pills and now he looks like this. But the way he said it was as if he was lying or telling the story he knew wasn't true. It's hard to explain. He seemed like he was trying to trick me. He was trying to sway me to his viewpoint. I just don't get why. All these people were mocking me because I was more of a city person, and they could all tell. This was like hillbilly hell, and they were all gaining up on me. I then just walked to the car and locked myself in the car. I just wanted to sit in the car until it was over. I was getting extremely bad feelings, evil feelings that were very mean, like something hated me there. It was lingering, and it was the worst feeling in the world. I told my friends I would be staying in the car the rest of the night. They begged me to come out and walk around, but I wouldn't budge, so I was in the car for the rest of the night. For that entire night, I was extremely uneasy. It was like a nightmare. Every once in a while, one of the zombies would walk by the car. It was pretty much pitch black, but there was a little bit of light from the moon. These zombie people would walk around in the darkness with their heads all down, all alone. Some would walk with a limp, They looked like real zombies to me. It was evident that it was the drugs making them act and look like a zombie. It was a very freaky sight. Most of these people that were there, that place was their life. Drugs were their life. That place was their life. It was unimaginable to me. This is where it got really freaky for me. I was sitting in the backseat of the car and my friends were with me when we all heard a child screaming and crying. We were in the parking lot, so there wasn't really anything around us except other cars. But the crying was so horrible. It sounded like a small child who was being hurt really badly. We all heard it and listened to it clearly for about 30 minutes. One of my friends even wanted to go out and find the child. The small child was calling out for help and screaming in pain, but it sounded so forced out, as if there was pain in the voice. The child would even shriek, "I don't want to, I don't want to," over and over again. Which is why it sounded like something was being done to this poor child. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. As I was sitting in the car, I began to get a scared feeling like something bad was about to happen. I was so scared, I started to feel lightheaded. I put my head down for a second. It didn't help at all. I thought it could have been the cigarette smoke. As I lifted my head, my entire field of vision went black, and I couldn't see anything. Then I saw an evil face with about 10 eyes and tons of teeth. The face looked like a red dragon. I remember it had dragon whiskers and everything. The eyes looked so mean and they were red. I remember the amount of red I was seeing was crazy. The face was snarling and it was looking right at me. The best way to describe this face is that it looked like a Chinese dragon. Those dragons you see at Chinese festivals. It even looked gargoyle-ish. It seems as if it was floating right towards me, right into me. And it scared me so bad. My friends were all freaking out, asking me what was wrong. I didn't even tell them what even happened because they wouldn't have believed me. I was extremely frightened after that, and I just wanted to leave. When the sun started to come up, we left. As the sun started to light the place up, I started to see how filthy this place was. It was nasty. It was like a junkyard. I'm not even exaggerating. I was so relieved we left. I just wanted to be safe in my home. It was the most traumatizing thing I have ever experienced in my life. I was full of fear. I got home and told my mom everything. She was looking at me in horror of what I had just seen. She believed everything I said. She then told me that it was probably a cult. It is kind of a far-fetched idea, but it made sense to me when I thought about it. The drugs that were being sold and the fee you had to pay to get in is all just money for them. Let me tell you that this place is in no way official at all. It is deep in the middle of the woods on top of a mountain. It is private property, so authority is not allowed there. So basically, we have no clue who's in charge of it or what they really are. It is just a place people know where to go to get drugs. My mom could tell I was truly scared, and so could a bunch of my people in my family. After this experience, I knew exactly why I was raised the way I was. I knew what I was raised not to experience was everything I just experienced. Everything made complete sense. I just understood my parents' teachings, and I felt so appreciative and later receptive. Okay, so this was in July, and for the next couple of months, I wouldn't leave the house. I would sleep all day, and I was always scared. I would have so many negative feelings. There was darkness in my mind. I would see entities everywhere. They would manifest everywhere around me all the time. I just felt horrible. I became depressed and hopeless. My family said they have never seen me like this before. I wouldn't let my girlfriend see me for about a month. I just felt so alone and so scared constantly. I would also have nightmares. I don't know how to explain the things I just saw, but I would see negative energy all around me floating through the air, like a fog. It would move and interact with me. These little clouds of fog would bend like water does with light. They would distort whatever images were behind them. They were extremely cold, and they were always in my room. Sometimes they would even turn blackish or an indigo color. I eventually recovered from all this demonic garbage that I experienced over this traumatic incident. And now I can say that I am fully happy again. And no, there's no way I am ever going to consider doing any of those drugs again. Not now. Thank you so much for reading. I believe that this was all a demonic encounter. And I'm just so happy that I have somewhere to vent, or at least tell my experiences to.